Just also a friendly reminder that that closed captioning for this webinar is available within Zoom, and you can find that function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if you've been to an I-STARR webinar before, you'll remember that the I-STARR project is supported by a grant from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and it's part of the larger NIH Helping to End Addiction Long-Term, or the HEAL initiative. It's also one of several projects that comprise the Consortium on Addiction Recovery Science, or the COARS network. Let's go to the next slide. So I am Amy Miracle. I'm a research scientist in the Alcohol Research Group at the Public Health Institute. I co-lead the I-STARR project with Dr. Carmen Masson, who's a professor of psychiatry in the School of Medicine at UCSF, the University of California, San Francisco. The team also includes co-investigators Sarah Zemore and Lenny Jason, biostatisticians Mina Subbaraman and Libo Lee, communication specialists Diane Schmidt and Dustin Kebzu, and the team's project coordinator is Quinoja Capitani. Let's go to the next slide. So the I-STARR project activities are guided by a 17-member advisory board comprised of a diverse group of leaders from across the country. Our advisory board members represent recovery and recovery housing leaders, treatment providers and payers, national policy advocates, as well as researchers and educators. We'll actually be hearing from one of our advisory board members today. Let's go to the next slide. So let me tell you about this amazing advisory board member and longtime colleague, Daryl Mitchell. So Daryl is the executive director of Progress House and vice president of Recovery Capital, I-STARR Indiana Health. Daryl studied public relations and marketing at Purdue University, and as an adult student at Indiana Wesleyan University, Daryl earned a Bachelor's of Science in Addiction Counseling and a Master's of Business Administration. So over the past decade, he's led and inspired change in the addiction and recovery support services field at the state and national levels. He's the founder of the Indiana Affiliation of Recovery Residences, or I-STARR, and serves as the board president for the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, or NAR. In 2017, Daryl was instrumental in drafting and passing legislation that placed recovery housing standards into Indiana law. As the Vice President of Recovery Capital with I-STARR Indiana, he helps oversee the integration of recovery principles and practices across I-STARR's healthcare system, including substance use treatment and recovery facilities, medical and outpatient behavioral health, housing, and employment services. In all his roles, Daryl amplifies the voices of those with lived experience within local, state, and national communities. So without further ado, I want to turn things over to Daryl to get things started on the topic of providing recovery support services within the context of recovery housing. Passing it to you now, Daryl.
Great, thank you, Amy. Excuse me, thanks for the invitation to be here today and for your and your team's help with our preparation. So those are some logos that of the organizations Amy mentioned that I'm involved in. So you can go ahead and continue, please, Dustin. So we're going to talk about just a recovery housing overview, and I'll breeze through this portion of the presentation relatively quickly because I see some colleagues on the line that are in this space, and I imagine this would be a review for many of you. And we really want to get to the discussion part of the presentation around integrating additional services in a recovery residence environment, both behavioral health and recovery supports, as well as potentially primary care and other services. So the next slide really just is a highlight of the very basics. And as I said, we'll move through this part relatively quickly. What is recovery housing? Who is designed to serve? How they differ from one another. Not all recovery residences are alike, and where they exist, why it's an essential service, and as I said, how to integrate services into a recovery house model that might serve a specific population. that traditionally hasn't done well in just a treatment environment and going, right into a lower level of recovery housing, and or folks that have just engaged in outpatient. So going to talk a little bit more about that bandwidth of folks that may be, experiencing chronic relapse and or need more comprehensive services for a longer period of time in order for them to actually begin the process of recovery. So in the next slide is just the big, what is recovery housing? It's pretty, please go to the next slide as well, Dustin. This, I think, reflects how interesting the discussion around recovery housing can be. These are a variety of different ways that people refer to recovery housing. My least favorite is halfway house. When I hear the term, I always think halfway to where. It's a term that came out of the Department of Corrections initially, and I understand why that term was used and why three-quarter housing is used, and people talk about sober living. I sometimes just for fun remind people that my dogs are sober living. That doesn't mean my dogs are in recovery. So my favorite way to refer to this space or this particular service is a recovery residence or recovery housing. The implication is that recovery is taking place inside of the facility. So the next slide is just some common components. Recovery housing is shared housing. It's made up of individuals with substance use disorder. It is abstinence focused, so it's without the use of alcohol and drugs among its residents, and the drugs, those that are not FDA approved and or under physician's care. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's a component of peer recovery support or a social model. So those people living with one another that can reflect back to others, in the house or the facility. The principles of recovery and how to navigate life without the use of alcohol and drugs. And so it operates like a family community. And community and connection are key in recovery. So the next slide, we're going to move into talk a little bit about who recovery housing is designed to serve. So the list is made up of those, or that the residents, this list is those that are in early recovery from substance use disorder. Generally are those that are in residence, at least higher levels of care of residence. Those that desire a recovery pathway that's free of alcohol and illicit drugs. So I pointed out that medications that are FDA approved for treatments of SUDS are consistent with the abstinence terminology and definition as we look at it. Are able to undertake the activities of daily living. So this is important so people can actually participate in the community and contribute to the community that they're living in. Oftentimes, 70% of those that are suffering from substance use disorder also suffer from a mental health disorder. And generally 40% of those with alcoholism are suffering from mental health disorder. So it's a large population made up of people with co-occurring disorders that the individuals are able to thrive in a shared living environment. And since funding is limited in most programs, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well, is that eventually the individuals are able to work so that they're able to pay for the fees associated with the recovery house. In the next slide, some of the reasons for choosing recovery housing. Somebody may be living in an environment that's not safe or conducive to successful long-term recovery. Very difficult to get well if you're in an environment that doesn't support you getting well. Oftentimes people are currently or recently homeless. So even if they're not completely unsheltered, it may be that somebody's been couch surfing and has just had in unstable living arrangements. Re-engaging with recovery, perhaps after return to alcohol and drug use. So, this notion of relapse or chronic relapse. Oftentimes after incarceration, where SUDS is indicated, people are looking for a safe environment for their housing as well as services. It could also be for people after they complete residential treatment. What we've found is research tells us that if somebody has substance use disorder and they only go to treatment without ongoing, continuing to other services, their likelihood of success is going to be in single digits. Very difficult for somebody just to go get stabilized and then being told to, hey, just don't pick up a drug or don't pick up a drink no matter what. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I recall somebody saying that to me, and I thought, if I could just, not pick up a drink, I would have just not picked up a drink. Um, Enrolled in outpatient SUD treatment is often sometimes the situation, and then when life events place recovery at somebody's risk. There's all reasons for people to choose recovery housing. So let's move through how pretty quickly. So these are how the recovery residents differ from one another. Uh, There are services and structures, and we'll talk a little bit about levels and what we mean when we hear levels. But the continuum of options corresponds to the wide range of residents' needs. So in other words, not one size fits all, similar to going to seeing a primary care physician and you find out you need specialty care. You're going to have to choose the level of care and services that are appropriate for where you are in your recovery or where you are in your needs. When you see the changes in the various levels of housing, the rules and the structure can vary significantly. And so what we've done at a national level is we broadly categorized 4 different levels of recovery housings. And there's also a movement of individuals among various residence types is common. That's to be expected. There's for different groups to be able to gather in a place together, different population types. And this one size doesn't fit all. The sizes vary. My operation, we have our largest facility, 86 beds in the facility. And, and in our smallest, we have 10 beds. And then we have some apartments with, you know, 2 to 4 people. So what you'll find is the national median shakes out to about 8 to 11 residents per dwelling. So it's kind of like a single family home is the typical scenario. And not all modalities are available in all places. So when you hear something in your local community or in the news that it generalizes oftentimes recovery housing, some people may say, hey, we're increasing capacity for recovery housing, but it may be that they're, increasing capacity on one end of the spectrum, and it's often on the lower end as you move into the different levels. So the need for higher levels of care when somebody is leaving one of those environments we discussed, the percentages aren't as great there. So that's a modality that isn't available in all places. This is graphically, the next slide just kind of shows what the National Alliance of Recovery Residences um, refers to in their 4 levels. So all of these houses have an alcohol and drug living in free environment. They all have what we refer to as a social model. So this means that there are other people. That's, I think, the secret sauce of recovery housing. You're in community. So there are people that are living in the house further along than others. So you have this community model of support and care in an environment that's safe and alcohol and drug free. As you move from level 2s up to 3 and 4, recovery support services be offered by peer specialists, other folks with lived experience, things like life skills, a variety of different subjects. Those can be financial fitness, it could be interpersonal communication or relapse prevention, a variety of, how to cook, how to care for yourself. Those vary. And then in the 4th category, level 4s are where clinical services are offered. And those are generally, they've been behavioral health, recovery coach services. So on the behavioral health side, so therapy and counselors is generally what we see. The next slide just talks about some services and structure. The continuum. I'm sorry, the standards and oversight. I got lost here. Sorry about that. So many of the residents meet third-party national standards. So NAR is a third-party organization that has written standards to help consumers, receive consistent and quality care. Many houses don't have any standards or guidelines, and so there's disparity in the marketplace there as far as what a consumer may be receiving. And not to say that there are not good houses that operate without being certified to a national standard, but they're in place for reasons. There's a few states that conduct their own credentialing programs. There's also national oversight organizations such as the Oxford House. So those four levels that I was referring to, level one is an Oxford House, where it's democratically ran, it's peer ran. There really isn't any organizational oversight. And then several states support their own recovery housing systems, including some funding for access to services and certification and workforce development. So a real mix of the levels of services as well as the levels of oversight. But there's one thing that has been consistent is it has been NAR being utilized as a national standard, primarily for levels 2, 3, and 4, and Oxford House for level 1. The next slide. These are just some priority populations. There's no surprise here, but there's ethnic and language minorities, parents with young children, oftentimes women with younger children. And those houses can be made up of, I've seen homes dedicated for women that are pregnant, with children 5 and under, children 5 and over, LGBTQ community, younger adults. My organization, we serve 18 and over, specific co-occurring disabilities, faith-based communities, tribal members, reentry, and then there's houses dedicated primarily or specifically to veterans. So there's different pathways that are supported as well. If we take a look at the next slide. They usually reflect the values and traditions of the communities where they're located. A place, let's say, that has a very strong 12-step community, and in some states I've seen that be Alcoholics Anonymous. In other states, there's a strong Narcotics Anonymous community. Many houses will be a 12-step house, and not affiliated with those fellowships, but utilize the literature from those fellowships to help support their residents as well as connect their residents to local fellowships that are 12-step based, or they can be faith-based, many faith-based houses as well. There's also very strong tribal traditions in some houses, and we're beginning to see more smart recovery houses appear as an alternative. All of these, though, have one thing in common. We talked about it early on. It's just they're all based on abstinence from the use of alcohol and illicit drugs. So now we kind of talk about the where, and we'll get to the why, and then we'll begin talking about some of the other things. So where can I find recovery housing? Most of the places where housing exists, in many cases, there are houses that are recovery houses, and people aren't aware that that's what they're used for. Generally, if somebody knows before recovery houses it plans on opening, then people are aware because it can be met with some local opposition for a variety of reasons. But there's single family homes in residential neighborhoods. I've seen nursing homes, motels, schools, farms, all converted into recovery facilities. Larger purpose-built projects. I mentioned my facility. We built that 25 years ago, specifically to serve this population. There's apartment and condominium-based communities in all settings, urban, suburban, and rural. Well, why is recovery housing an essential service? I think the best way or the thing to remember about recovery in general, which is why this is an essential service, is this is a chronic condition. right? So this isn't something that's just treated acutely and then the person is fine. Um, you know, I think if it wasn't a chronic condition, then we really could just have people go to treatment. Once they are completed with treatment, they could just move on to, living a wonderful life. But recovery is a process, right, that occurs over a period of years. It is a brain disease as well as having a physical component to it. So there's patterns of thinking and acting required, and time to change those. Environmental factors are included, or important rather, including the residential environment. And then recovery capital, this notion of what's the currency, what are the things that I need to help me ensure long-term recovery? That takes time to develop, including elements that may never have been acquired during years of drug use. So there's home, purpose, community, um, establishing new connections in a new community and purposeful activity, gainful employment. Those are all oftentimes things that people have not been able to string together. It's simultaneously for a successive period. Recovery outcomes improve with longer resident stay. It's not that 6 months is the magic number for long-term recovery, but there is a significant impact at that kind of 6 month mark where not just incremental improvements are seen or people's willingness to continue their journey, but it's almost exponential, like a hockey stick. And that just bodes well to this issue of the longer somebody's in this environment, then the greater chance they have at having transformative experiences and beginning to get well in such a way that they're going to want to continue this journey. So there's better recovery outcomes, certainly. We have studies that show that the people in recovery housing are significantly more likely to achieve sustained long-term recovery. And I find that to be true for those people that haven't done well just going to treatment or just going to, PHP or IOP or some other outpatient, or just going to the rooms of recovery, or just getting assistance through their local church or whatever their community support is. So there's a group of people that significantly improve the likelihood of their long-term recovery as a result of being a resident recovery housing. Better employment and earning outcomes, that seems to be an obvious. And then there's this reduced criminal recidivism. The likelihood of somebody just kind of the same pattern that they've been involved in. So the evidence around that is sufficient to persuade ASAM, SAMHSA, many state SUD, mental health agencies, departments of correction, leading providers, and behavioral health professionals of the value of recovery housing. And I'd like to tell you a couple ways that that's played out that you may not be aware of. The next slide is something that I couldn't be more pleased about. I was fortunate enough, Amy was fortunate enough, along with some other colleagues from NAR, we were invited to participate in the writing of one of the chapters that appeared in this latest ASAM fourth edition. And so I think it's chapter 15, if you have access to the ASAM fourth edition. But the titles was the chapter was entitled Recovery Housing and Other Recovery Support Services. And what this has been able to do is, or one of the things this has led to, is the acceptance, I think, of recovery housing in the medical, communities, because ASAM has been used, as the way that the American Society of Addiction Medicine identifies ways to treat individuals with substance use disorder. So being asked, for years we were looking for ways to work more closely with ASAM. So to have that now in a place where they're talking about bundling recovery housing with different types of treatment, and what that would mean for residents, paired with research that says the following things, it's a real advancement. The next piece has to be working with payers, to get them to reimburse for recovery housing. But this is a significant step forward, and it moves recovery housing down this continuum, and it's come off the hills with things like SAMHSA saying this is an evidence-based practice, ASAM including it in their criteria. As a result of putting it in the ASAM criteria, the next slide just kind of shows the way that the nomenclature is spelled out now. So, where we had level 1s, level 2s, and 3s and 4s. The next slide, please, Dustin. There's corresponding letters because ASAM uses numbers. So you'll have 3.1 and 3.5, ASAM, and then up to 3.7, et cetera. So instead of saying, well, we have a level 2 or a level 3 and they got a level 3.5, what we've done is said, well, level 1s are going to be type Ps, right? And so this is the nomenclature that appears in the ASAM text. Level 2s are a type M, so that means it's a monitored house. There's recovery support and staff monitored structure. Level 3 is a type S for supervised, so type P for peer run, M for monitored, S for supervised. So in this case, you got support staff as well as staff monitored and structured life skill development. And then the fourth type is C for clinical services. So all the things mentioned above, but also life skills and now clinical programming. Some of the other things that you could do is you could Google for the SAMHSA best practices for recovery housing. This was something that NAR assisted in the writing of in 2022. It has information in this that is determined to be best practices for the operation of recovery housing, and then also things to look for as from a consumer standpoint for quality recovery housing. There was also a publication that you can access that's the next slide, please, was in joint effort with the National Council. And this was really just a policy guide. So this was, it included strategies and tools and policy language to support the infrastructure of recovery housing and protection for people. Thanks so much, Wanji. In recovery housing. So there's some advocacy components to this, but I think that these, if you're not familiar with these resources, would be worth just looking them up and seeing what's, what information might be helpful for you that's included in them. So real quick, the next slide, NAR's initial decisions were around these things. Let's develop standards for a way to determine compliance and consistent operation. There's additional work that's going to be done on defining those levels. There's always opportunity for, being more clear and improving on what has already been done. Wanted to be able to support the full spectrum of recovery houses, being sure that it was inclusive of a variety of different recovery pathways. There's no one particular recovery pathway that has the corner on recovery success, and it's multi-dimensional. So it could be, based on alcohol and non-prescribed medications. All of them, though, have this commitment to the social model, and that we wanted the standards to be able to be achievable and accessible to low-cost operators. And then it was going to be decentralized. So this model has been based on service organizations located in the states. So Amy mentioned NR is the state affiliate for NAR in Indiana. In the next slide, it shows you what was happening nationally in 2010. A lot of things were happening that were regional, not necessarily statewide, and only in a handful of spaces. So those green states is where initially there was some traction around the utilization of these standards. The next slide shows where we're at, today, and we have 31 state affiliates across the entire state. 6 more in development. So there's 1,700 providers utilizing these national standards in those 4 different levels, representing over 6,500 houses or facilities. Our current resident capacity within that association is over 60,000 individuals at one time. So we estimate that over 160,000, probably closer to 175,000 people are served through that network. And then you put the Oxford house network, in addition to that, and then those houses that aren't certified, obviously, you can see that there's a relatively large inventory, but we're pleased with, the growth that we've had amongst those states that want to have some consistency around operation of quality houses. The next slide is just the other reference material. In addition to those slides I showed you with SAMHSA and NatCon, there's information from the National Drug Control Strategy in 2022 and 24 from ONDCP out of the White House, the Surgeon General's report from 2016, excuse me, and then the final report on the President's Commission on combating drug addiction and opioid crisis in 2017. There we go. A quick refresher, right? So why don't we move into, I want to talk to you a little bit about my personal experience and some work that we've done around the recovery housing model, and then I'd like to show you a video first, and then we'll talk about why we ended up going down this road. So this video was part of a packet submitted to SAMHSA in 2022. It was a contest that SAMHSA had announced called the Behavioral Health Recovery Innovation Challenge. My understanding is there were 3,000 applicants nationally, 10 awardees, and we were the only, Progress House was the only recovery house given the award, and the only organization in Indiana, the state that I work in, that was given the award. So the goal was to challenge, of the challenge, identify innovations for peer-run, community-based organizations that were advancing recovery on the ground and in the community. So I want to show you a quick video, and then we'll talk.
Hello, my name is Daryl Mitchell. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I serve as the executive director of the largest and oldest recovery house in Indiana. Progress House has been serving men since 1960. The increase of overdose deaths, the opioid epidemic, and the manufacturing of synthetic drugs are just a few of the reasons that what worked so well for us for over 5 decades needed to be reimagined. Substance use disorder is a complex problem that requires customized care. In November 2019, we consolidated with I-STARR Indiana Health to offer what we refer to as whole health recovery. Under one roof, our residents receive primary medical care, behavioral health therapy, peer support such as recovery coaches, medication-assisted treatment, life skills education and job training, all in a recovery house's social model. As a result of offering these comprehensive services in one place, our residents are healthier in mind, body, and soul, and our success rates have skyrocketed. I'd like you to hear from some of our alumni, some of our staff members, and some of our community stakeholders.
Hi, my name is Ann Hazlett, and several years ago when I was working in the White House, I had an opportunity to take a tour of Progress House. And at the time, I made a comment that what I saw here was, in my opinion, a model for the state of Indiana and for the nation. And over the past 2 years, it's been amazing to see that comment really play out on the ground. One of the biggest strengths that I recognized early on in my visit was that the leadership here at Progress House has recognized that the needs of a person to be truly healthy are often much more than just being substance free. There are issues that need to be addressed, whether it's housing, jobs, involvement with the legal system, reunification with family. And these are things that are often hard for a person to access, and Progress House makes that possible by really putting that all under one roof and access to those services all in one place. Another strength that I really value about Progress House is how strongly they work with other partners in the state, organizations that might have the passion and the desire to do what they're doing here, but don't know how to get there. And there's a lot of information that Progress House is willing to share openly with people who just reach out wanting that assistance. I also really value the strong partnership they have in the places where they are located with the city officials, county leaders, state officials, and the surrounding neighbors, really looking to be an asset to the community and the places where they build. And then lastly, they serve people from all over our state. I believe that more than 50% of Indiana counties have had people come to their locations, and so it's a benefit really that reverberates statewide.
My name is Benny Williamson, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've been here at the Progress House for 18 years. The innovative model that we have today is pretty much the most effective one In my tenure, I enjoy coming to work every day. We're doing a lot of more effective work with our clients today.
When I meet Hoosiers succeeding in the workforce, building families, pursuing their educational dreams, it's no surprise that their recovery journey started here at Progress House. This program is a model for not just the city of Indianapolis and our state, but the nation as well. When someone comes to Progress House, they're not just getting treatment for substance use disorder. They're receiving healthcare, dental services, recovery supports, housing, employment opportunities, all under one roof.
Hi, my name is Jim Telgarglu. I'm a recovery coach at Progress House. I've been around this house for 15 years now. The first couple of years were as a resident. I was very fortunate. Progress House let me come live here. It saved my life then and continues to save my life as a recovery coach. I felt like I needed to give back, so I came to work here 13 years ago. Progress House has always been amazing, has saved a lot of lives, but recently we have added a lot more services, and between the clinical and the housing that we have, there's nowhere that even touches this place. I love this place like it's home, and for the guys that live here, immediately they see exactly what I'm talking about because it's home to them too.
Hi, my name is Brandon George, and I'm the Vice President of Mental Health America, Indiana. My relationship with Progress House has been both personal and professional. As somebody in long-term recovery from substance use disorder, I've spent countless hours here on Sunday mornings in recovery meetings, trying to help strengthen my own personal recovery, and for just that alone, I'll forever be grateful for the Progress House. Professionally, I've spent just as many hours in the building, working with the leadership at Progress House to help build out Indiana's recovery infrastructure. As the leader of an advocacy group, people reach out to me regularly about how to get involved in their communities, and oftentimes that's about recovery residences. And I can tell you, the first card I hand out, the first number I give, is always to Progress House. They've been a leader in this space for years, and they will continue to be. Whether it's being one of the first recovery residences in the state to take medications for opioid use disorder, or the first to really start looking at an individual's overall health. We're proud to have them in our state, and we're proud to have them leading the charge on the best practices around recovery residences.
Thanks, Dustin. Got a bit of a kung fu movie thing happening there. Sort of syncing up, but thanks for following along. So we've been around for 63 years. So this recovery facility is the oldest and largest in the state. One of the things, in the next slide that's shown is the day that we had some legislative signed into effect. When I look at this picture, I always feel like I'm part of the security detail. I'm on the far right there. And I'm not standing as close as the other folks, but I actually was involved in the legislation. And one of the things that we were attempting to do was to, elevate, the need for, some consistency around the way houses were operating. So there was a bill put into place that basically said if you're going to receive state funding and or referrals, you needed to operate to a national standard such as NAR was the bill. So one of the things that had happened over the years, if you take a look at this next slide, is in 2019, Progress House consolidated with this larger nonprofit healthcare organization. And they were fully integrated healthcare provider. So there was primary care being offered, medical services. It was a community mental health center, so behavioral health services, a bunch of social services, and addiction treatment and recovery support. There was no residential program at that time. So they had, as an organization, $500,000 of experience, or half a century of experience. And as I mentioned, Progress House was 63 years. So two long-standing organizations, both nonprofit and independent. One of the things that was occurring is I began to see a group of people coming into the house that were sicker than years past. And I think a piece of that was synthetic drugs. So there's a lot, the increase of polysubstance use had increased. But this was around probably the second wave of opioid the opioid epidemic, where I would say the third has even made it worse with, and I think like fentanyl and xylazine and some things that have happened in this third wave. But in that second wave, where we begin to see people move from not just prescription opioids, but now we're in this place where people are using heroin because they couldn't get access to those opioids. It was a younger group of people. It wasn't just the middle-aged alcoholic that were coming and who had hit a bottom faster than traditional populations that we had served. And in many cases, because of the drugs involved, we're now seeing overdose deaths take place. So I realized that even though we had been doing what we were doing for decades, considered a premier program, had some success, is that we weren't meeting the needs of that bandwidth of people that weren't able to be successful in their traditional continuum, just going from treatment into a level of care, just anything that was safe and stable without additional services. So I began looking for a partner. And in Indiana, one of the things they also said is, hey, if you're going to be a level 4 recovery house, taking advantage of some of the funding sources, we also want you to be a Medicaid provider. So that added another complexity to the issue. Most recovery houses are not, they don't have mature infrastructure to the point, I say mature or robust enough to be Medicaid providers. That's typically not the focus of a traditional recovery house. So it made sense to try to find somebody that offered additional things. One of the things is the next slide will show you is that this is the integrated model that we began working with and now deliver to to the people that we serve. So this notion of integrating behavioral health services or other recovery support services, the primary medical care, that's through the FQ8C side of the house. So, I would encourage you, if you're a provider or a provider, try to connect them to an FQ in their marketplace so that their clients can access, medical care. We were also offering withdrawal management at our treatment facility, and so that piece is mislabeled. I apologize, but the medication assisted treatment component is also something we begin to offer. And at one time, there wasn't anybody doing that in our state. So there's been an improvement there. We also were offering recovery housing as well, behavioral health services. So there was a place for people to go see individual therapists, also to continue with group. And so we operationalized these services in a way that equated to a certain amount of clinical hours each week, while still being ran on the foundations of the social model I mentioned in this 12-step recovery. So you see that peer support and 12-step blue puzzle piece. And then we also had case management people that were working with people on, do you need to get your license back? Do you have an issue that's a civil legal issue that you need to deal with? What's going on with, the criminal, your justice, your criminal justice system requirements? And then also the skills training component that I talked about. So one of the things that this has bared out is that the outcomes, where we used to see 30 to 35% successful outcomes defined as somebody starting this program that takes about 6 months to complete, it went to 70% plus. And I believe that the reason for that is that you're treating an individual holistically. So not only do they perhaps needed to get stabilized in a treatment facility, but there's now an opportunity to say, well, let's now have a look at your, the other things like your A1Cs, your blood pressure. Do you have a high blood pressure issue? What's your cholesterol levels look like? Let's maybe do some testing for Hep C. So there's an opportunity to begin to treat, some primary medical issues that generally somebody in active addiction or in early recovery is not addressing. In addition to that, you have people that are going, I'm not sure if I'm depressed or anxious because I'm drinking a fifth of vodka, or if I'm drinking a fifth of vodka because I'm anxious or depressed. And it really doesn't matter, right? But that needs to be addressed. So being able to provide the appropriate therapeutic intervention that's needed, and or any potential medications that are needed, you begin to get people physically and mentally healthy enough to begin this work in life skills and recovery. And, I think the easy way to consider that is if you think about your own personal experience when you've been in a situation where you didn't feel well, you didn't feel like doing a lot, right? So getting people healthy physically and mentally is critical in order to get them in a position where they can begin to practice and be interested in learning new skills and how to navigate life without the use of alcohol or drugs. This next slide, I'll just breeze through these last two quickly, is just an example of our continuum. So this top property is our treatment facility. That was another component that we added. So we knew that people without resources needed to be able to go somewhere for, withdrawal management and detox stabilization. So there's a facility that we have with 88 beds where somebody can start there. And then that's Mockingbird Hill, the blue box there on the bottom of the axis. And that yellow just is kind of representing somebody's journey through this. They could go to Progress House for 6 months, and then we have 3-quarter transitional recovery facilities post that for somebody that successfully completes Progress House and would like to go on in an apartment living scenario. So that's one of the ways in which the continue may look. As I mentioned, those other services, when somebody steps back into their community, they're now a patient of this healthcare system. And these are different cities around, central Indiana that they can go to continue their medical care and their behavioral health care. The last slide is really just, that puzzle piece again with this integrated model, this holistic whole health recovery model is the way we refer to it. And this is what our continuum looks like. Right now, 88 beds at our treatment facility, 96 beds in our level 4 recovery house, 62 beds in our level 3 and level 2, and then we're purchasing a couple single family houses, the next 30 to 45 days to continue to build that out. So I don't think that it's reasonable to think that every town can have an organization that are able to pull these pieces together culturally, pull them together and operationalize them, and braid these funding streams together in a seamless way. But I do think that every community has an opportunity to resource map these components that are evidence-based, in ways that these partnerships can be beyond just knowing about this facility, on the other side of town, but a relationship established, whatever else needs to be done to be able to conduct business with that other group, so that people that are slipping through the cracks and or recidivizing have an opportunity to get into an environment with a higher level of care, with some behavioral health and healthcare supports and recovery supports, giving them a better likelihood of success. Because there's just a group of people, I believe, that won't be successful without this level of care. I'm going to stop there, Amy. The next slide is just kind of my contact information and answer, any questions.
That was wonderful, Daryl. Not just the overview of recovery housing and all the concepts that are intertwined within recovery housing, but also what you've done with Progress House and kind of how that fits into what we know about recovery housing, how it's similar, how it's different, and about how you were able to pull Progress House together to do what it's doing and to be what it is right now. So thank you very much. That was just amazing. So now is the time we have for Q&A. We have about 5 minutes. So if folks want to raise their hands, we can call on folks, or feel free to unmute yourself if there's a lull and jump in. But we have access to Daryl to ask some more questions of him. So I see Shauna, you have your hand raised. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, yes, I got it. Thank you. Thank you for all the great information. So I have a question about with the co-occurring disorders. So do you find that like you have the substance use disorder with the co-occurring mental health, or do you gear more towards, or do you see more clients with like the primary as their mental health disorder, or the primary diagnosis as mental health, and then the co-occurring as substance use? Is there
Yeah.
I feel like there's a difference.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I give an example. There was a situation today where somebody, was schizophrenic, but they also had they presented with substance use disorder. So in that case, as we go through the assessment process, take a look at the requirements of those services that I described, as well as the ability to be a contributing member of that community is
Mm-hmm.
one component and be involved in the day-to-day stuff. And then it also, you have to look at, well, do you have the capability to be able to serve somebody's needs who is schizophrenic? So in our
Yeah.
case, what I would say is the primary diagnosis is substance use disorder. What we found though is that 70 or 80% of that group, and I think we deal with some of the most complex cases because they haven't been able to be successful in traditional pathways,
Mm-hmm.
also have some mental health disorder. So it is co-occurring, but it has to be within the wheelhouse of being able to be served
Mm.
by the staff that we have. Now, in the event that they are able to be served, we also have group homes where we deal with a seriously mental ill population. And we have psychiatrists and other folks within the healthcare system that we can refer people out to. But I think it becomes very difficult,
It
because
is.
with that the social model piece, um, one of the things we talk about is, hey, you got to contribute to the welfare of the group. So
Mm-hmm. Yes.
if you're coming in and in some way you're causing harm, and it may not be intentional, but you're just not creating a harmonious environment or safe environment
Yeah.
for somebody
Yeah.
else to recover, then we go, then this piece doesn't fit you well.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it meets a big need, but it is not mental health driven. What
Right.
we
Right.
find is, you can't chop people up and go, well, we're going to deal with these people from the neck up, and we're going to send those people there from the neck down to get treated. Like, okay, if
Mm.
SUDS is your primary diagnosis, but you're suffering from some level of depression and anxiety, there's been trauma in your life, and you need some therapeutic intervention for those pieces. You need to get your meds stabilized so that you can do the work of recovery. That is an ideal scenario, and the percentage of people in that scenario. And then you put on top of it, I don't have resources. I was unsheltered. I have issues, I need life skills assistant. There's a whole bunch of other pieces. Then you go, okay, it's not just those other two components. We're going to have to teach the young person who went to the bottom quicker and they have these
Mm.
issues we just described, how to adult.
Yeah,
And then
that's
also,
that's what we're doing right now. Like I have an issue, right? I mean, I'm so glad I got on this because like I want to cry because I'm getting so much information, but I think that and I'll make it real quick, just one last question. When you
um,
if you're doing an interview process, do you ask them what is their primary diagnosis? Is that okay for me to ask? Like, what is your primary diagnosis? Is it substance use or is it mental health? Is that
yeah.
okay to ask?
Well, so what I should do, and I think they may have put it in the chat, Shauna, you should grab my personal contact information and we should schedule some time offline and I can share some resources with you.
Okay.
One of the things that we're fortunate of is that I have a clinical staff and an operations team with lived experience doing a co-interview, or not co-interview, but they're both interviewing the individual. And
Okay.
then as a group, they decide clinically, can we meet the need? From a person with long-term recovery or recovery experience, is this individual going to be a good fit for the program? And
Right.
so
Okay.
with the application, there are certain things that are asked that are going to ferret out, what are your issues? What medications are you on? What have you been diagnosed with?
Mm-hmm.
And then, questions around willingness and what that looks like and other pieces. But I can share some specific documentation with you that might be helpful.
Thank you. I got your contact info. I will be reaching out to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Van, I see your hand up. Van Smith.
Hey, Happy New Year. Hey, Daryl.
Van, how are you, my friend?
Good, man. Good.
Yeah, good to see you.
Try, trying to stay somewhat warm in this 12-degree weather.
I feel you. I feel you.
So, my question is, in regards to the overall, first of all, the video is great video, incredible work you guys are doing out there. And we're doing some similar work here in Rochester, working with housing on a continuum now, not just doing recovery housing, but doing
Right.
crisis stabilization housing, doing transitional housing, doing permanent supportive housing, and we've had to open it up. I went down to Trosa back in June of last year, and that really kind of opened my mind up to looking at housing on a continuum as well as peer support services, and then partnering with local providers within the community so that we could bill through Medicaid for the social model, social support services. So um, definitely want to have a deeper conversation with you, and as we continue to work with the University of Rochester in regards to studying recovery housing and clinical services. And what we talk about here is the marriage, right? It's not one or the other, it's that relationship working together, the social model along with the medical model as we look to, address the needs of individuals seeking recovery from substance use disorder. We use the term here at Recovery House of Rochester, seeking a new way of living, right? Because it's just, as you stated, it's really bigger than someone just abstaining from drugs and alcohol. It's a much bigger situation than that. My question, though, is I had to go all the way around the parking lot to get to this one question. My question is, as it relates to working with um, treatment providers, how do you go about formalizing those relationships beyond words?
Well, I think one way, so we opened up our own treatment facility, but before that, for years, we would have things like MOU, things like that in place. So there was a defined business relationship with parameters and expectations. We were excited, and that we had a partnership beyond just a place that anybody could rent. So sat down with leadership and talked about the reasons why something more formal would be important, how we could construct that in a way that both parties would be happy with. And so I had some help from a legal team, write some MOU language that I was comfortable with, and then went and had those conversations. And no different than anything else, I did research on, who was providing what services, what the costs were, um, what the reputation was, et cetera. So, but I wanted to make a quick comment too, Van, about one of the things you said. I think it's critical that we acknowledge it, and I'm thrilled about it. We're talking about things now beyond just the recovery housing piece. So when we start talking about permanent supportive housing, housing first, transitional housing, we could talk about harm reduction. I'm a person with an abstinence-based recovery program. My point is, as the people in this space as providers, uh, we need to have dialogue that is inclusive of um, and as a transition word, not either or, right? Because what people need is to be met where they are, given the appropriate choices. Let them know what would be involved in heading down that path and then assisting him in that, right? It's not the time for me to be, I don't believe, a cheerleader for any particular type of recovery. My program is a particular type. So if you're going to come into this deal, here's what we're doing. But I want the community to be able to meet the individuals where they are, because somebody that needs stable housing may not be ready for abstinence-based recovery. Now, I pray that they get ready for that, but it's not something we should withhold from somebody because they aren't there yet, right? So I just think breaking those silos down and having a conversation as community members around, you know, this and not either or is critical.
Excellent message, Daryl.
Thank
And I hate to break off discussion, but we're at the top of the hour, and I know that people are need to transition to other meetings. But thank you so much, Daryl, for this presentation, for your talk. If we can pull up the slides, if you liked this webinar, there's another webinar next month. We'll be talking about therapeutic communities. Again, another model of recovery housing. We'll have folks from West Care presenting on their therapeutic communities. We also are, as I-STARR, part of COARS, and that COARS sponsors the NCARS conference. So I want to alert people about that. That conference is in April. It's a virtual conference, the 23rd and the 24th. Registration is open for that conference. So if you haven't heard about NCARS, please go to the COARS website. We'll drop some information in the chat for you about NCARS. It's the only national conference that's focused on recovery support services and recovery science. It's a really great conference. I'm a little bit biased because I'm on the planning committee for it, but we pull in some great speakers, and it's Recovery Central. So that is happening in April, and again, we hope that we see you back here at an I-STARR webinar. All our past webinars are up on our website, so feel free to go to our website to access prior webinars and our 12 video training series for recovery housing providers, but also for folks who are interested in doing research on recovery housing. We have a 12 webinar training series on that as well. So with that, we're over a little bit. Thank you for your attention, and thank you, Daryl, for an amazing presentation, and we hope we see you back here next month.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, folks.